Good afternoon. This is John Bushka, and today I want to discuss with you a bill by Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee of Utah, and that would define pornography in federal law without the idea of the reasonable person standard, and might create some risks of some serious censorship. It might have a reasonably good chance of passing. So let's just get on and look at the literature on it. Here's the bill itself, and it it's called the Internet Obscenity Definition Act. It updates the Communications Act of 1934 by adding a definition of obscenity, and it does refer to the idea of scene as referring to visual images or videos, or even images of a graphic sexual image of person in a sex act, or nudity of private parts and that kind of thing. And it adds to the idea that taken as a whole applies to the prurient interest and is intended to titillate and lacks serious literary, artistic, or political or scientific value. And it adds that to the definition, and the significance of it is that it doesn't include the idea of a reasonable person standard as to what that is. So it's his standard. That's what people are saying. So it could mean almost any sexually explicit material. And there are some some stories online that talk about it. And first of all, here's his press release. And then here's a story in Reason magazine by Elizabeth Nolan Brown. And I'll give you the links to all of these. And here's another story in Huffington Post. And again, what they call the Miller test, is apparently eliminated. Here's what I wanted to compare this to was that in the in the in the 2025 Project 2025 document on page 5, there was a definition of pornography, or what they call a manifestation of pornography, as is the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children. And then it went on to say it has no First Amendment protection, and that people who produced and distributed it should be imprisoned, and that educators and even librarians should be held responsible as registered sex offenders. It makes a very extreme claim. And that's on page 5, and I'll give you the link for that. I think you've heard about that. The thing that was scary about it was that it included the idea that you could be it included the idea that merely discussing something, even without images, discussing a concept like gender ideology, or transgender, or they say transgender ideology here, but gender ideology, or even sexual orientation, could be considered pornography in the minds of some people. And it's also significant that this definition does not specifically refer to age verification. In other words, he wants it to be illegal to, although he's not including the ideological definition. I have to go back and say that his definition is only visual. It doesn't include the ideology part that's Project 2025. But nevertheless, any material that was lewd in this sense, and any visual material, whether even an adult saw it, could be made defined as obscene, and could be lead to prosecution in his theory. So age verification isn't even an issue in this sense. But ultimately, I think, again, as I've mentioned before, a lot of this gets back to the likelihood, the main concern they have on the internet is keeping it absolutely away from children, which you could, and we've covered before the stories of regarding Pornhub and blocking access in some states because it didn't accept um, the apparent restriction that some states had that you were going to have to mail your ID, your real ID or something, and they were going to keep a database to verify you were an adult. That's what Pornhub thought it meant. Of course, we could also have the idea of device verification I've talked about before. But here's an article on Vice, has a pretty good description of VPNs. But the question then would be, in the future, could Congress or could a state pass a law that it's illegal to use a VPN to get around, the state law? If you're in that state, could somehow they try to do that, and could somehow you get caught? I don't know if you could be sure that you couldn't. And again, part of the reason for some of this is that there is an attitude that if you can completely keep adult concepts of sexuality, anything about the nuclear family and marrying and having children for the nuclear family away from minors, they won't get the idea that they're trans or gay. Now, I never saw pornography when I was growing up. They turned out to be gay, so that I'm kind of don't support that idea. I'm not exactly, I guess, a counterexample. But they seem to reject the idea of you're being born with something, and that it's all a matter of your personal choices, however you're born. And so um, they want to completely keep this completely away from children, which is they're trying to do in Hungary, and which they've tried to do in Russia. And of course, Trump, remember, talks to Obama a lot. I just wanted to also give you a reference today to a Reality's Last Stand article that, society has become very feminized, and boys are not being helped to get through puberty the way they used to be when I was growing up. And I did not conform to the standards of, that were normally expected of young men. I wondered in third grade, why are they making such an issue of this for me? Why are they making me toe the line? And I didn't understand I was that far behind physically than other boys. It might have been because I had the measles. I had the measles. This was back in the early 50s. And some people have a harder time than others do, just naturally, because of distribution of abilities people have. And of course, that we've talked about that before. That's one reason why the left wants to eliminate biological sex and use its own categories of gender to replace it, to make some life easier for many youth, or also to stop bullying. They say to stop bullying, and why that's been introduced in schools. But I thought I would just pass along that article from Reality's Last Stand, which I would encourage you to read. And so, generally, I would say that I would say that maybe this bill is not as big a threat as it's being made to look in many of the articles, um, because it's slightly tightening the original definition of obscenity, and I don't think it would affect um, the kinds of videos that show people, making out, but that don't show actual sex that you see on YouTube today. The things that it would prohibit would probably be already prohibited on YouTube and Facebook and many other of the mainstream platforms, even though it might not always be enforced. So I don't know if it makes as much difference as people are saying it does. But I did want to make you aware of this. I'm going to give you all the links in the description. And I'll also just share with you where I was. Did a little day trip. I did a big trip to Texas about 3 weeks ago at the end of April, but I went to the other bridge across the South River. The Riva Bridge is one of them, but I went to the other one in Edgewater, Maryland, and on Thursday. And I'll show you. I'll show you just a few pictures from that. That was actually in a restaurant in Coconut Joe's. It reminded me of, because it says this vodka is made in Austin, Texas. This reminded me of the very nice trip I had to the film festival, in the Paramount Theater. And here's the Edgewater Bridge, Maryland Route 2. I guess I can enlarge it a little bit. And another picture. And they have some palmetto plants, or maybe they're coconut plants or something, but they look like plants that you would see no farther north than South Carolina. The restaurant said they take them in for 4 or 5 months of the year, but the climate most of the time in Maryland is mild enough, even in the winter, they can survive in coastal Maryland near the water. There's the restaurant. And there's another picture of the bridge and a sign next to it. And one more picture of the bridge. And I thought I would show, and here's a picture from my other camera, my Sony camera. And I'll just wind up by showing you a very quick video I took of the bridge. And that'll perhaps do it. Edgewater, Maryland. So that's essentially what I have today, is this caution on this new bill by Mike Lee. And there's some other things going on, a bill in Texas about discussing abortion. I mentioned last week, we might cover that, or at least assisting people in getting them. It's not sure, again, that that's as dangerous as they're saying this, but we'll look at that again. And a bill in Virginia about minors being able to use, under 16 being allowed to use social media sites more than an hour a day. We'll discuss that again soon. But there's a lot of stuff going on. Plus, I'll be discussing my plans for how I want to sort of republish my material in the Do As Do Tell books. There's sort of a philosophical question going on, particularly about when people are writing about their own experiences, as opposed to writing other people's stories or making up normal fiction for entertainment, that we'll be talking about soon. But that's what I had for today, and I definitely do thank you for listening.